Do you know why Texas is known as the Lone Star State? Believe it or not, Texas actually owes both its flag and nickname to Florida, the original Lone Star Republic. Due to this little-known connection between America's two most freedom-loving territories, I thought it appropriate that we uncover the hidden history of modern-day Texas and its native peoples. In the fall of 2023, myself and my hippy-dippy Old World Florida expedition team geared up for a road trip to Texas in order to witness a total annular eclipse at an astrological conference of which I was also a guest speaker. Along the way, we visited some of that state's most significant and mysterious ancient sites. Join us as we camp out at Enchanted Rock, Texas's most legendary geological feature, and later travel to Rockwall, which would have to be its most controversial. Despite appearing like an obviously man-made wall, complete with quartz crystal mortar, the so-called experts to this day maintain that the buried stones of Rockwall, Texas, are nothing more than a natural formation. An assertion which we, and the original discoverers of the wall, happen to disagree with. As you all know, Texas is a big state, full of big things, so get ready for some giant trees and tales of giant cannibals. This documentary will cover everything about Texas that the ominous they do not want you to know. Things like black Native Americans, astrologically arranged burial mounds, human sacrifice, elongated skulls, out-of-place architecture, so-called ancient aliens, and much, much more. As our nation's southern border is continually disrespected, I believe it is now more than ever that we must recognize the ancient value of the lands on which we today dwell and by default are obligated to defend. This video is lengthy and information dense, so make sure to kick back, spark up, and pour yourself a little liquid sunshine while you're at it. The views expressed in this video do not necessarily reflect my own. Now enjoy.
Welcome to Florida, baby.
Introducing Dr. Narco Longo.
In 1513, Spanish conquistador Ponce de Leon landed near Melbourne, Florida, beginning the European settlement of the United States. Not many people are aware that the name La Florida was coined by de Leon and applied not only to the Florida Peninsula, but all of North America, which he had claimed for the Spanish crown. The Europeans had theretofore been restricted to the Caribbean islands and small portions of South and Central America. Texas, like all of the United States, quite literally started as a piece of Florida. The first European to see Texas, we are told, was Alonso Alvarez de Pineda, who led an expedition in 1520. While searching for a passage between the Gulf of Mexico and Asia, Alvarez de Pineda likely created the first known map of the northern Gulf Coast. This map is the earliest recorded document in Texas history. Between 1528 and 1535, 4 survivors of the Narvaez expedition, including Alvar Núñez, Cabeza de Vaca, and Estevanico, spent 6.5 years in Texas as slaves and traders among various native groups. Cabeza de Vaca is said to be the first European to have explored the interior of Texas. Around 1542, the Hernando de Soto expedition entered Texas from the east when that territory still fell under the name of La Florida. It would not be for another 140 years that Texas would see any significant European activity. The French settled parts of East Texas in the 1680s, after nobleman René Robert Cavalier claimed the entire Mississippi River Valley for France. But when the Spanish moved to recapture the coast of Texas in 1689, they found the main French colony at Matagorda Bay massacred by the notorious native Karankawa, a tribe of cannibals who spared only a handful of children. The turn of the 18th century saw gradual settlement and native missionary work by the Spanish, with the construction of some very notable buildings being dated to this era. France would not abandon its claims to Texas until November 3, 1762, when it ceded all of its territory west of the Mississippi River to Spain in the Treaty of Fontainebleau. The late 1700s saw the Comanche ally with the Spanish, who together drove most of the other tribes in Texas to near extinction and Christianization. During the American Revolution, Texas and the Tejanos helped the Americans in British West Florida. Unlike East Florida, Texas supported U.S. independence by also fighting in New Orleans and other campaigns in the Gulf of Mexico. In 1799, Spain gave Louisiana back to France in exchange for the promise of a throne in central Italy. Although an agreement was signed on October 1, 1800, it did not go into effect until 1802. The following year, Napoleon sold Louisiana to the United States. The original agreement between Spain and France had not explicitly specified the borders of Louisiana, and the descriptions in the documents were ambiguous and contradictory. The United States insisted that its purchase also included most of West Florida and all of Texas. The disagreement would continue until the signing of the 1819 Adams-Onis Treaty, at which point Spain gave Florida to the United States in return for undisputed control of Texas. However, in 1821, Texas would become a part of the newly independent nation of Mexico, thus ending the period of Spanish Texas. 11 years earlier, in 1810, Anglo settlers living in West Florida rebelled against their Spanish rulers. When the rebels raised a small force to capture the Spanish fort at Baton Rouge, Melissa Johnson, the wife of one of the soldiers, made a flag for them to carry. With a 5-pointed white star on a blue background, it was soon dubbed the Lone Star Flag. The independent but short-lived nation of West Florida became known as the original Lone Star Republic. Between 1835 and 36, Texas rose in revolt against Mexico, fighting under West Florida's Lone Star Flag and voluntarily submitting to U.S. annexation in 1845. The single star motif would go on to be adopted by the state flags of Arizona, California, Nevada, Utah, and Minnesota. The 5-pointed star had emerged as a symbol of enlightenment and defiance against tyranny, and would remain a motif for the flag of the Texas Republic. The 5 points of the star represent fortitude, loyalty, righteousness, prudence, and broad-mindedness. According to the Texas State Historical Association, the word Texas had wide usage among the Indians of East Texas, even before the coming of the Spanish, whose various transcriptions and interpretations gave rise to many theories about the meaning. The usual meaning was friends, although the Hassanais applied the word to many groups, including Caddoan, to mean allies. The Hassanais probably did not apply the name to themselves as a local group name. They did use the term, however, as a form of greeting, as in, hello, friend. How and when the name Texas first reached the Spanish is uncertain, but the notion of a great kingdom of Texas had spread in New Spain before the expedition of Alonso de Leon and Damian Massenet in 1689. Massenet reported meeting Indians who proclaimed themselves Thecas, or friends as he understood it, and on meeting the chief of the Nabadaches, one of the Hassanai tribes, mistakenly referred to him as the governor of a great kingdom of the Texas. Whatever the Spanish denotations of the name Texas, the state motto, friendship, carries the original meaning of the word as used by the Hassanai and their allied tribes, and the name of the state, apparently, was derived from the same source. Other putative meanings, such as land of flowers, paradise, and tiled roofs, from the thatched roofs of the East Texas tribes, have less evidence from contemporary accounts to support them. The potential meaning of land of flowers for the word Texas would count as a perplexing link to Florida, a Spanish word of the same meaning. On October 14th, 2023, an annular solar eclipse occurred around the world, with its path of totality passing directly through the state of Texas. Coinciding with this great celestial event was an astrological conference hosted by Robert Phoenix in Kerrville, Texas. Robert had invited me to speak at the event, so my girlfriend, Kat, and I headed off to Texas in my van. Along the way, we stopped at some of Florida's unique historic gems, like War Mineral Springs in Northport, which thousands of people have moved to from Eastern Europe, believing it to be the original Fountain of Youth, which Spanish conquistador Ponce de Leon sought after landing nearby in 1521. Then on to Newport Richey, Florida, where I revisited an ancient Indian sacrificial altar with 2 petroglyphs publicly displayed on the deck of a sports bar. We then met up with my good friend Jeffrey, who lives in the exact vicinity of the Georgia border, which Florida's 1936 Republican candidate for governor, E. Callaway, proclaimed to be the original Garden of Eden and launching point for Noah's Ark, as described in the book of Genesis. The primary evidences for his theories are the climate and fertility of Florida, the presence of Earth's only equal four-headed river system, and the endemicity of gopherwood to that exact same four-headed river system. An exhaustive case for this assertion is presented in other videos of mine. After meeting up with Jeffrey and departing from the Garden of Eden, we made our way around the coast of the Gulf of Mexico, which can be considered the true Fertile Crescent. We then passed through Louisiana, visiting some of America's largest and oldest trees. Our time in New Orleans can be viewed in my Cities of the Dead video, in which we toured the Big Easy's most famous cemetery and its most ancient, with the ex-singer of Black Flag. We finally crossed into Texas and met up with my friend and fellow researcher, Dylan, in Houston. Being our first venture into the state, we ought to give a description of the native people whose territory present-day Houston once fell under. This portion of Texas was once inhabited by a race of cannibals known as the Atakapa and Akokisa. The meaning of Akokisa is not known for certain, but Atakapa is either a native Choctaw or Mobilian term, meaning
eaters of human flesh.
For their everyday diet, the Atakapans largely ate whatever animals were available to them, but shellfish, alligator, duck, and turtle would have been staples. They were also known to spear flounder by night, using torches to see. They used oil from alligators as a medicine and insect repellent. The Atakapa are said to have been shorter, dark-skinned, and stout. In fact, their depictions often give the impression of an Ethiopian or Negroid racial type.
My first question, Chief, is your name.
Oh, Michael Amos,
And how old are you, Chief?
67.
And what's your occupation?
I'm retired.
And what did you do prior to that?
I was in the military, retired military.
Oh, okay. And what's your tribal membership then?
Oh, we got about 1,500 tribal members.
And what's your position in the tribe?
I'm the principal chief of the tribe. We cover southwest Louisiana and southeast Texas.
Okay.
So,
Okay. What is the name of your tribe in their native language?
Ishak, I-S-H-A-K, Ishak. I know he came about, the slur word was Atakapa, okay? Was given by the Choctaw, and then when the Spanish and the French came over, they kept the word up, Atakapa. But our real name was really Ishak, you know. So that would be the name from the beginning of time, you know, with the tribe. Yes.
Their clothing included breechcloths and buffalo hides. They did not practice polygamy or incest. Unlike other coastal tribes, the Atakapans and Akokisa made great use of captured horses. The tribes predominantly lived in huts during the winter and chickees during the summer, using furs for warmth. The homes of chiefs and medicine men were erected on earthwork mounds made by several previous cultures, such as the Mississippians. William Byrd Powell, a medical doctor and physiologist, regarded the Atakapan as cannibals. He noted that they traditionally flattened their skulls frontally and not occipitally, a practice opposite to that of neighboring tribes, such as the Natchez Nation. The following comes to us from French historian Antoine Simon Lepage du Pratz, who lived in Louisiana from 1718 to 1734. Quote, "Along the west coast, not far from the sea, inhabit the nation called Atakapans, that is, man-eaters, being so called by the other nations, on account of their detestable custom of eating their enemies, or such as they believe to be their enemies." End quote. The next excerpt comes to us from The Atakapan Indians by Joseph T. Butler. Quote, "When during battle the Atakapa warriors either captured or killed a particularly brave enemy, certain parts of the enemy's flesh were cut off, dried, and smoked. This smoked flesh was taken back to the village, where a ceremony ensued. All the pregnant women were lined up, and the chief would place a morsel of this smoked flesh in each one's mouth. While placing this flesh in their mouths, the chief would express his hope and sentiment that the unborn child would acquire the particular traits of the enemy, such as his valor, strength, or speed." End quote. We continue from Duprat's, quote, "Since the French have gone among them, they have raised in them so great a horror of that abominable practice of devouring creatures of their own species, that they have promised to leave it off, and, accordingly, for a long time past, we have heard of no such barbarity among them." End quote. When Louis Leclerc Milfort, a French traveler who spent 20 years living among the Muskogee Indians, came upon a band of Atakapa in 1781, he reported that they had elected a Jesuit missionary as their chief, and despite continuing to cook Spanish captives alive, no longer ate them. He would also emphasize the hospitality that the tribe had shown him. According to the Texas State Historical Association, the Akokisa were Atakapan-speaking Indians who lived in extreme southeastern Texas, between the Trinity and Sabine rivers. Spanish conquistador Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca found himself in Akokisa territory in the early 16th century, after being shipwrecked near Galveston Bay, as did Frenchman Francois Simars de Belleisle in the early 18th century. Much of what we know about the Akokisa comes to us from de Belleisle, who lived among them for about 2 years, before being rescued by a neighboring tribe. De Belleisle gave the following first-hand account of the Akokisa. Quote, "His face has tattoos, with a black line that goes down the front to the end of his nose, and another from the lower lip to the end of the chin. Another small one next to each eye, and, on each cheek, a small black spot. Like the nose, the lips also are blackened, and the arms are painted with other markings. The women's breasts are painted with numerous concentric circles around the nipples. 1, 2, or 3 black lines are tattooed on their faces, beginning on the forehead and running across the nostrils down the chin." End quote. Atakapa oral history says that they originated from the sea, not the Bering Strait, and that an ancestral prophet laid out their original rules of conduct.
Where did your tribe, what is the origin of your tribe? How did your tribe begin? Where did it start from?
Well, there's a lot of saying. Some say that we came from the sea. We don't really know, but the Ishak been here for like 4,000 years, BC. So we don't really know. There's a lot of write-ups about Egypt. It's about Egypt and stuff like that during the Ice Age. But there's nothing really solid that I know of that where it actually originated from, except here.
The Akokisa diet probably consisted of fish, oysters, deer, bison, bear, a special type of superfine maize or corn, while tubers of the greenbrier vine provided meal for baking and cooking. Ritualistic black drink made from native holly was used for purifications in certain ceremonies. When a wild animal was slain, the Akokisas would let no piece go to waste. It seems this attitude was applied not only to wild animals, but their enemies at arms as well. We return to the words of de Belleisle, quote, That morning, they killed 15 or 16 buffaloes. We ate as much as we wanted, because we had not eaten for 2 days. When this expedition was finished, we saw smoke at a distance of about 1.5 leagues. One of them asked me what this was. I told him that it was a fire on the prairie. He asked me if there were people. I answered him that someone ought to be there, and that no deer had lighted the fire. They said that 8 of their band would go there to kill the people, and that they were their enemies. They left to go towards this smoke, where they found 10 or 12 toyals, that is, the name of their enemies. Nevertheless, they were able to kill but one, who was up in a tree to knock walnuts down. With their arrows, they made him come down much more quickly than he had climbed up. When this man was dead, they loaded him on their horses and brought him to the place where we had stayed to wait for them. When they returned, they threw this Indian on the prairie. One of them cut his head off, and another one cut the arms off, while they skinned him at the same time. Several of them ate the yellow fat, which was still raw, and finally, they devoured him completely." End quote. The Akokisa war party was amused by de Belleisle's refusal to take part in the cannibalistic rites, so under the pretext of serving him bison or deer meat, they secretly fed him human flesh. When de Belleisle discovered this trick, it, quote, made him vomit until he threw up blood. We must note that the Akokisa did not resort to cannibalism out of sheer hunger, for as we have just read, these Indians had already slaughtered over 12 bison. Despite their anthropophagous tendencies, the Akokisa did observe somewhat of a moral code, consuming only their enemies and never their own kind. When stranded Spaniard Cabeza de Vaca passed through Akokisa territory, he found the natives there to be horrified after learning a party of stranded Spaniards had consumed each other in starvation. The next morning, we would arrive at Kerrville just in time for my introduction at Robert Phoenix's conference. That afternoon, Robert recommended we visit a nearby attraction in Ingram known as Stonehenge II. Not knowing anything more than that, we headed down the road to Texas's very own Stonehenge. The story goes that in 1989, Kerr County native Doug Hill finished work on the back patio on his Hunt, Texas property and was left with one extra limestone slab. As a so-called joke, he offered it to his good friend and neighbor, Al Shepard, who then accepted it and stood the slab upright in the middle of his pasture. Shepard and Hill liked the look of the monolith and built an arch around it. The 13-foot arch reminded them of Stonehenge in England. Soon a vision formed, and Shepard contracted Hill to build their very own Stonehenge II. The original Stonehenge in Wiltshire, England, was allegedly erected around 2500 BC and is believed to have been functional as an important site for religious or astrological ceremonies. Shepard and Hill's project took about 9 months to complete. Hill fabricated the stones from steel, metal lathe, and plaster, and anchored each with cement. Stonehenge II is 90% as wide and 60% as tall as the original. Although most of the megaliths are artificial, 2 of the central stones are the authentic limestone slabs. It is difficult to ascertain the origin of these slabs, but despite their lack of history, local folklore attributes a spiritual significance to them. Later, After visiting Easter Island, off the coast of Chile, Shepard was inspired to add 2 13-foot-tall Maui head statues to the collection. Although the original Maui were created by a people off the Pacific coast of South America, there is actually a little-known connection between Easter Island and the Lone Star State. For starters, both Easter Island and La Florida, the original Spanish name for all of the North American mainland, including Texas, get their names from the fact that they were discovered during Easter celebrations. Then we have the Seminole Indians and Black Seminoles, who made great migrations across Texas, for whom places like the Seminole Canyon is named. Believe it or not, the exact style of hats depicted on the Maui stones of Easter Island were worn by the native Seminoles of the United States. The Seminole Indians of Florida have been the focus of a couple videos of mine, but let us now learn about the Seminole and Black Seminole history of Texas.
I know you've heard stories of African enslavement in the Americas, its cruelties, the harshness of it. But I'd like to tell you another story. The story of families who fought not to gain their freedoms, but to maintain their freedoms in the United States of North America. The Seminoles.
Tonight is traditional dancing, Seminole styles, and it's true to Seminole culture and heritage, dancing that you will be seeing here and actually can participate in if you wish.
My favorite definition of history is the story written by the winners. It's a pack of lies written by the winners.
I want to tell you another story about families who fought not to gain their freedom, but rather to maintain their freedom in the United States of North America. This is another American African story, but unlike any you've heard before.
We have to look beyond just the west of the United States. We have to look at the Americas. Because when the Africans arrived, there was somebody here. Indigenous people were incorporated into the religions of the Africans who arrived.
Indians knew early arriving Africans as merchants, medicine men, and magicians, not slaves. Their earliest meetings are recorded as occurring around 1500 BC.
What we call Istalusti, or black people, the majority of them did migrate with what we now consider called the Oklahoma Seminoles. As the Oklahoma Seminoles are today, we are still the only Indian tribe in the United States that still has black people, that has no Indian blood at all in them, that are still citizens of the tribe.
Bloodlines followed the mother, so children born to an Indian mother were called Indian, no matter the physical attributes.
Being Seminoles, the majority did come to the Indian Territory as prisoners of war.
After 3 wars with the U.S. in Florida, some Seminoles capitulated to Indian Territory, mostly on the advice of their black counselors and advisors, rather than attempt to endure the designed oppressions imposed on them because of their rebelliousness. Thousands of Seminoles escaped Indian Territory, running north to Kansas, west into the desert lands and other Indian nations there, and south into Mexico. Those in Mexico became a military colony protecting Mexico's northern border along the Rio Bravo. The Mexicans called their black Indian mercenaries Muskogee. The first Muskogee Seminole Indian scouts enrolled at Fort Duncan on promises of regular army pay and land to call their home. Living in squalor 4 years later, no land, they were challenged by the law when they wouldn't tolerate the insults from the white populace they were protecting. In 1874, Muskogee Private Adam Payne won the Congressional Medal of Honor in battle at Paladuro Canyon in North Texas. In 1875, Muskogee's John Ward, Isaac Payne, and Pompey Factor won Congressional Medals of Honor at Seminole Canyon in a battle with 70 Comanche they had trailed for weeks. From the time of their arrival in Mexico and Texas, these unheralded Muskogee warriors fought and defeated Napoleon's French army, invading Comanche, Lipan Apache, and Texas outlaws, while never losing a man in battle.
When we were in Florida, we were black Seminoles. When we went to Oklahoma, we were still black Seminoles. When we left Oklahoma and went to Mexico, we were still black Seminoles.
What does African American include? There are many varieties of African Americans and many people that don't fit into one particular category.
Within the history of the American native is found the missing link in black history and genealogy: Seminoles. A people omitted from the annals of American history curricula. Muskogee, an independent mercenary force that policed the American West and northern Mexico.
There's a good chance you've never heard of the Seminole Indian Scouts who protected the border and the earliest Texan settlers a century and a half ago. Fortunately, we have with us a man who has made it his job to remember. I'm honored to welcome Leroy Young, a direct descendant of a Seminole Indian Scout who were real military heroes, although unsung heroes. And it's a difficult story, but one worth knowing because of the important role they played in settling Texas. Lee, welcome. Can you start by telling us who the Scouts were and the role they played?
The Scouts played a role in assisting the government to make the border area of Texas, the areas that the settlers wanted to settle into. The Scouts played a vital role in making those areas safe for the settlers to move into. And so the Scouts served as scouts for the cavalry, or there for the Army, from around 1870 to 1914. And during this period of time, the Scouts served the companies that they worked with there in the military. They became to be known as very honorable and outstanding warriors and fighters, and 4 of the Scouts received the Congressional Medal of Honor.
And one of those 4 was your great-grandfather, is that right? Great-great-grandfather, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. And that was Sergeant John Ward. He received the Congressional Medal of Honor in 1875.
And what did he receive it for?
He received it along with 2 other Scouts. One was named Pompey Factor, and the other was named Isaac Payne. They were on a mission, were traveling with their commander. Well, they were tracking some Comanches that had stolen some cattle or horses. They engaged with these hostiles in battle. They became stranded from their horses, and once they got back to their horses and were attempting to ride away from this battle, well, their commander, Lieutenant John Bullish, he lost his horse. So the Scouts turned around and went back to rescue their lieutenant. They traveled back into gunfire, and as a result of that, the 3 Scouts received the Congressional Medal of Honor.
The group that's gathered here are direct descendants of the Seminole Scouts, and they've come from all over the United States. They come here in September to Brackettville every year for this reunion.
My name is Augusta Pines, and I'm a descendant of the Seminole Indian Scouts here in Brackettville, Texas, and we're gathered here today for our annual celebration.
The Seminole Scout descendants are the original Seminoles that come up from Florida. They moved up through Georgia there and they picked up runaway Negro slaves, then ended up in Oklahoma, and then from there they were run out of Oklahoma and they ended up down in a place called Nacimiento, Mexico. By late 1871, 1872, they were transferred up to Fort Clark to serve up here, and there was approximately 50 of these scouts. 4 of them become Medal of Honor recipients.
My name is Bertha Benson. I am a descendant of the Black Seminole Indians. The Gullah language, and of course we always call it Seminole here. We were never told that it was Gullah. We never called it Gullah, but turns out it is. It was English, but it was different. And I heard it all my life that growing up, my parents, grandparents, aunts. My name is Bertha. I come from the Fay family, and I'm Black Seminole Indian descendant. Here where I'm sitting, where I sit, is this land. We've been to live here many, many years ago. It's where my ancestors been to live.
There's still people in this area here in Brackettville that speaks that language, and I really wish I had took my time and learned it and listened and tried to understand that language when I was growing up. Because it's really an important language that I just let go.
I think it's really important to teach the Gullah to the next generation, because if we don't teach it, I believe it's going to die. And my family, my parents spoke it all the time. Our kids, they don't know it, and it's going to die if we don't pass it on.
Now, back to the Maui at Stonehenge II. Al Shepard passed away in 1994, and his property stayed within the family. In 2010, the Shepard family donated Stonehenge II and the Maui to the HCAF in memory of Al, a longtime supporter of the organization. After funds were raised, the structures were removed to their current home on this campus in 2012. Interestingly, the current location which Stonehenge II was moved to falls directly within the path of totality for the 2023 Annular Eclipse. And, being a copy of an astrological observatory, it raises the question of whether or not this coincidence was intended by those who selected its new location. It is known for a fact that the prehistoric people of both Florida and Texas revered the stars in the same capacity which the ancient Egyptians, Aztecs, and Babylonians did, designing their temple complexes and arranging their earthworks to certain constellations or celestial bodies. The following day was the date of the annular eclipse. The hotel which hosted Robert Phoenix's conference was situated directly within the path of totality, so we and the attendees gathered in an outdoor area to view it. We would also find out that a team from NASA was staying in the exact same hotel as us. As the great celestial event grew near, we sat on the ground and waited. While all of you normies were wearing your NASA-approved, George Soros-funded, Neil deGrasse Tyson-looking, Fauci-bought Goy goggles that they sell at gas stations, and sometimes hand out for free, my friend Dylan had a unique trick up his sleeve. Though some would argue that human eyes can be trained to safely stare into the sun, The only natural way to safely view the eclipse in ancient times would have been with the aid of certain minerals. Obsidian, for example, can be fashioned into almost any shape and ranges from opaque to translucent. Dylan was lucky enough to have an obsidian viewing glass. Here's what the difference looked like. Now I would like to share something with you that was very unnerving. I have heard stories of strange phenomena accompanying an eclipse, but on this trip we would experience it ourselves. On our little trip from Florida, we brought my camper van and my buddy's camper trailer, both of which use a generator and battery. Immediately after the eclipse had ended, when we returned to the parking lot, we found both of our batteries completely drained and unresponsive. My girlfriend's iPhone was also permanently destroyed after she pointed its camera directly at the eclipse. Many other electronics suffered a similar fate. Luckily, my van's solar panels were still working and my battery was able to recharge. Though it took months for the display to turn back on, it did regain full functionality. Jeff's camper also returned to normal, but only after a couple months. Speaking of solar panels, this is actually one of the best ways to illustrate what was happening. On a normal, sunny day, the sun is constantly emitting energy onto the earth. During an eclipse, however, the sun is actually absorbing electricity, not emitting it. Thus it sucks whatever is in the battery straight out through the solar panels, like some sort of a celestial vampire. When illustrated simply, free of superstition, one can see why ancient people would have timed certain ceremonies and sacrifices to coincide with solar eclipses. Finding myself amidst a large group of people, all staring together at the sun, it brought to mind a certain group of giant, sun-gazing Native Americans. The portion of the Texas Gulf Coast extending from Galveston Bay southwestwardly to Corpus Christi Bay was once inhabited by a race of abnormally tall, cannibalistic Indians known as the Karankawa. Galveston Island in early colonial times was known as the Isla de Malhado, meaning Isle of Doom, and Isla Blanca, meaning White Island. The name Karankawa loosely translates to dog lovers or dog raisers, in reference to the dogs that accompanied them on hunts, swims, and recreational activities. Interestingly, this native Texan name is eerily similar to the old Irish word concavar, meaning dog lover, from where we get the name Connor. Karankawa and Concavar. Karankawa, Concavar. We must note that the root word for canine is the same root for the word cannibal. The dogs of the Karankawa had straight ears and fox-like snouts, and, like those of the Florida Indians, were bred to be voiceless, perhaps to aid in surprise attacks, or just general peace and quiet. The nearby Lipan Apache called the Karankawa Nada Kun Dadahe, or the people who walk in the water, in reference to their method of wading in the shallows to spear fish and catch turtles. However, the neighboring Tonkawa tribe called them Keles or Kilis, meaning wrestlers, due to the Karankawa's skill in hand-to-hand combat. They would also be called Yakakon Kapai, meaning barefoot or those without moccasins. We must note that the Karankawa referred to themselves as Karankawa. Although they were well known for cannibalism, the U.S. government used the Karankawas as allies in its wars against the Comanches and Apaches to the north. The Karankawa were ancient sun gazers, meaning they stared at the sun as it set into the sea, as did some other native groups in Texas. They, like the Indians of Florida, also smoked tobacco through their nostrils, first to the north, then to the east, west, and south. Like other southern tribes, they prepared a ritualistic black drink from native holly, but only the men participated. All Karankawa people practiced cranial deformation. They shaped the foreheads of babies, first with a piece of cloth, then a thin board, then a wadded cloth. Each of these was tied to the head with a bandage and left to stay there about 1 year. There are many who believe that certain tribes did in fact artificially shape their skulls, but only in emulation of a separate humanoid species altogether, one with a naturally elongated skull. The Karankawa had distinctive tattoos, notably a blue circle tattooed over each cheekbone, one horizontal blue line from the outer angle of the eye toward the ear, 3 perpendicular parallel lines on the chin from the middle of the lower lip downward, and 2 other lines extending down from under each corner of the mouth. Moreover, 16th century European explorers wrote that the Karankawa people had labrettes, or piercings of cane, on the lower lips, nose, and other parts of the body. Men, women, and children alike rubbed shark's oil on their entire bodies regularly to deter mosquitoes effectively, and to keep their skin soft and supple. Europeans who encountered the Karankawa were disgusted by the odor. The Karankawa had a specific way of conversing. They carefully repressed their breath while speaking. At the end of their sentences, they exhaled heavily, releasing the air they had held back during speaking. Linguist Herbert Landar, among others, has argued that the Karankawa language and people originated from the Caribs, for who the Caribbean Sea is named, and the same has been said for some Indian tribes in Florida. Their personal names were kept secret from Europeans, and they did not believe in making eye contact while conversing. A multitude of other strange and seemingly disrespectful customs existed among the Karankawas. They were known to frequently whistle, but the reasons for this are unknown. The Karankawa were noted for their skill of communicating with each other over long distances using smoke. The Karankawa could make the smoke of a small fire ascend toward the sky in many different ways, and it was as intelligible to them across long distances as their language. Their methods are unknown. For musical instruments, they had a large gourd shaker, a type of bowed or malleted instrument, and a flute. Marriage rites between Karankawas were lengthy and laborious, with the men providing food for the family of his wife-to-be for months before approval. Families were arranged patrilocally and patrilineally, in contrast to many tribes of the southeastern United States. Between the husband and wife, no signs of fondness, intimacy, or special treatment were observed. As in the case of many Florida Indians, Karankawa culture recognized 3 gender roles: male, female, and a third taken on by some males and women. Males who took on this third role are called manangia. They generally took on female roles and activities in daily life, while also playing a special role in religious rites. According to some accounts, these hermaphrodites also acted as passive sexual partners for other males. Seeing as how this tribe had a taste for both bison and buggery, this may or may not be the origin of the phrase, "Only steers and queers come from Texas." A sailor by the name of Noah Smithwick would call the Karankawa, quote, "the most savage-looking human beings I ever saw," after encountering them in 1827. Father Gaspar José de Solis, a Spanish missionary, would relate that the Karankawas were, quote, "savage, indolent, and lazy, so greedy and gluttonous that they devour meat that is parboiled, almost raw and dripping in blood," end quote. This opinion was likely due to the fact that they did not have a regular sleep schedule, but slept whenever they wished. They also ate and drank at all times of the day. Jean-Baptiste Talon, who the Karankawas abducted and adopted at the age of 10, gave the following account in 1698, quote, "The only meals that horrified him were those the Karankawas made of human flesh, as they are all cannibals, but toward their savage enemies only. They never ate a single Frenchman that they had killed because, they said, they do not eat them." Jean-Baptiste vouches that he once went 3 days without eating because nothing presented itself during that time except some human flesh of the rival Ayenis people, whom they had killed on one of the expeditions, end quote. Even though some academics have attempted to downplay or even dismiss the cannibalism practiced by the Karankawa for what I can only assume are political or emotional reasons, even the official website for the Karankawa Indians reluctantly admits that the tribes did in fact practice cannibalism. Quote, "The Karankawas, along with most other native groups in Texas, practiced a limited form of anthropophagy, which is a fancy word for cannibalism, prior to the 1800s. The Karankawas' exo-cannibalism served to dishonor an enemy, similar to how scalping functioned culturally, and as a means of absorbing a foe's power. Anthropophagy was reserved for ancient enemies, and was meant as the highest level of disrespect. As with the Akokisa and Atakapa, lack of sustenance did not drive any form of cannibalism, and the anthropophagy occurred on deceased bodies, not on a living and breathing victim. By the mid-18th century, the Karankawa's anthropophagy diminished after repeated contact with Europeans," end quote. Interestingly, Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, a Spanish conquistador who lived among the Karankawa for several years in the 1530s and wrote a memoir, made no mention of cannibalism except for ritualistic consumption of deceased relatives in the form of funeral ashes, quote, "presented in water for the relatives to drink." Like the Akokisa, the Karankawa people were horrified to learn European castaways had cannibalized each other out of sheer hunger. It is worth noting that even in modern times does Texas produce a disproportionate amount of cannibals. Infamous American cannibal Daniel Paul Rakowitz, who murdered his girlfriend in 1989 and made soup from her brains in New York City, had actually grown up in Rockport, Texas, well within the coastal territory of the Karankawa tribe. In 2008, 26-year-old Christopher Lee McEwen of Tyler, Texas, was arrested after calling 911 and calmly describing the murder of his girlfriend. Authorities arrived to find her ear cooking on the stovetop. In 2009, 33-year-old Audie Sanchez of San Antonio, Texas, was arrested after cannibalizing her own son, confessing to police that the devil made her do it. In 2018, 23-year-old Alexander Barter of Joaquin, Texas, was arrested in a sting operation after soliciting a victim on the dark web whom he could consensually murder, eat, and do other terrible things to. In 2023, 18-year-old Caesar Olalde of Texarkana, Texas, murdered his entire family because he believed that, quote, they were cannibals and they were going to eat him. That the Karankawas were a people of extraordinary height is evidenced by the first-hand accounts of those who met them while still living. In 1687, 3 Spanish sailors failed to abduct a Karankawa because, as one of the kidnappers wrote, all these Indians are of great stature and very robust of limb. In 1720, French Captain Jean Beringer measured the height of some Karankawas as being over 6'6". He also noted that they had a, quote, very solemn look and handsome countenance. Popular Texas historian Edward Kilman, in describing the Karankawa, wrote, 6 to 7 footers, they towered as giants, among savages of ordinary stature. Magnificent physical specimens, but facially hideous. End quote. John Jenkins, a Texas pioneer, once said about the Karankawa that, quote, they might well have had been termed giants, for they were most magnificent men in size and strength, seldom below 6 feet in height. Even the National Park Service of Texas concedes that, quote, the Karankawa were noted for being tall, between 6 and 7 feet, excellent archers, and ferocious in appearance. The remarkable height of Karankawas is also evidenced by the skeletal remains from the areas which they and their ancestors once inhabited. In fact, as in the case of Florida, skeletal remains of Titanic men have been found in every corner of the state. The following was printed in the Valley Morning Star on Monday, August 8th, 1938, in regards to giant skeletons which likely belonged to the Karankawa. Quote, in one mound in Williamson County, Austin archaeologist Eric F. Pell found a mass burial, probably the result of a terrific fight between tribes. The 67 skeletons he removed were those of a giant tribe, the origin of which, he said, baffles archaeologists. Most of them were 7 feet tall, and the excellent condition of their teeth indicated that they were young men. Many of the skulls had been pierced by arrowheads. The nearest known Indian type, in relation to huge stature, were the Karankawas, cannibals which inhabited the Texas coastal plains and caused trouble for pioneer settlers. End quote. The Victoria Advocate reported the following on July 17, 1932. Quote, huge skull found, skeleton of giant. The bones of one of the skeletons found by the University of Texas crew exploring the Moorhiss Mound below Victoria showed that its processor had, in life, been a very large man, far above the average size. End quote. The following comes to us from the San Antonio Express in 1940. Quote, that Texas had a giant on the beach in the long ago appears probable from the large skull recently unearthed in a mound in Victoria County, believed to be the largest human skull ever found in the United States and possibly the world. Finds made through excavations in Texas are beginning to give weight to the theory that man lived in Texas 40,000 to 45,000 years ago, it is said. Feel free to pause the video and screenshot if you'd like to read the entire article. While some of you may think that a human skull over twice the normal size is something that simply cannot exist, the skull has in fact been confirmed to have existed by Carol Spock, the head of records for the Texas Archaeological Research Laboratory at the University of Texas. Despite being studied by dozens of people over the years, the skull is said by some to have mysteriously disappeared. However, other very large skulls are present in the collection. The giant skull can be seen in a number of authentic photographs, however. After the conference had come to an end, we made our way north to Texas's most impressive geological feature, Enchanted Rock. Enchanted Rock is a pink granite mountain located in the Llano Uplift, about 17 miles north of Fredericksburg and 24 miles south of Llano. Enchanted Rock covers roughly 640 acres and rises around 425 feet above the surrounding terrain to an elevation of 1,825 feet above sea level. It is the largest pink granite monadnock in the United States. A monadnock is an isolated rock, hill, knob, ridge, or small mountain that rises abruptly from a gently sloping or virtually level surrounding plain. In 1971, Enchanted Rock was designated as a National Natural Landmark by the National Park Service. After hiking around and spending the night there, one can see why Enchanted Rock was rated in 2017 as the best campsite in Texas in a 50-state survey. Park activities include caving, hiking, primitive backpack camping, rock climbing, and picnicking. Archaeological evidence indicates human visitation at the rock going back at least 11,000 years. According to the book The Enchanted Rock, published in 1999 by Ira Kennedy, quote, "On the basis of archaeological evidence, human habitation at Enchanted Rock can be traced back at least 10,000 years. Paleo-Indian projectile points, or arrowheads, 11 to 12,000 years old, have been found in the area, upstream and downstream from the rock. The oldest authenticated projectile point found within the present-day park is a Plainview point type, dating back 10,000 years. With these resources, some 12,000 years ago, the first Texans became the wellspring of Plains Indian culture." End quote. Folklore of the local Tonkawa, Apache, and Comanche tribes ascribes magical and spiritual powers to the rock, hence the name Enchanted Rock. While attempting to hide from Anglo settlers in the area, the natives would hide on the top 2 tiers of the rock, where they were invisible from the ground below. The first Europeans to visit the area was probably Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca in 1536. The Tonkawa, who inhabited the area in the 16th century, believed that ghost fires flickered at the top of the dome. In particular, they heard unexplained creaking and groaning, which geologists attribute to nighttime contraction of the rock after being heated by the sun during the day. The name Enchanted Rock derives from Spanish and Anglo-Texan interpretations of such legends and related folklore. The name Crying Rock has also been given to the formation. Legends associated with Enchanted Rock include a haunting by a Native American princess who threw herself off the rock after witnessing the slaughter of her people, and alleged sacrifices that were conducted by both Comanche and Tonkawa tribes. The rock is rumored to host at least one lost silver, gold, or iron mine. Footprint indentations on the rock are believed to be those of a Native American chief who sacrificed his daughter and thus is condemned to walk Enchanted Rock forever. The screams of women are heard at night, believed to be those of a white woman who took refuge on Enchanted Rock after escaping a kidnapping by Native Americans. Spanish soldier Don Jesus Navarro is said to have rescued a native princess known as Rosa, daughter of Chief Tehuan, after her kidnap by Comanches, who intended to sacrifice her on the rock. Walking around the rock, one cannot help but notice shapes and formations which do not seem to be the result of natural erosion. Let me know in the comments what you think some of these formations could have been caused by.
house, honey, there ain't nobody home but me. Bring it on down to my house, honey, I need your company. Well, the tomcat's sitting on the railroad track, hollered at the mama cat, she answered back. Bring it on down to my house, honey, there ain't nobody home but me. bring it on down to my house, honey, ain't nobody home but me. Bring it on down to my house, baby, I need your company. The big dog jumped and he run around the ring. Little dog jumped and he couldn't do a thing. Bring it on down to my house, honey, ain't nobody home but me. Bring it on down to my house, honey, there ain't nobody home but me. Bring it on down to my house, honey, I need your company. You can shake it, you can break it, you can hang it on the wall. Throw it out the window, I'll catch it before it falls. Bring it on down to my house, honey, there ain't nobody home but me. My house, honey, ain't nobody home but me. Bring it on down to my house, honey, I need your company. Say, old man, can you play a fiddle?
Oh, my granny's old Keith can play a little.
Bring it on down to my house, honey, ain't nobody home but me. Home but me. Bring it on down to my house, honey, I need your company. Well, that's my gal, she's the one that did it. She began to like it and she just couldn't quit. Bring it on down to my house, honey, there ain't nobody home but me. I got the gambling blues, polka dot blues. I thought I was a gambler.
From there we headed north to the town of Rockwall, just outside of Dallas. Located along Texas's infamous State Highway 66, Rockwall is named for the state's most mysterious archaeological discovery to date. A vast network of prehistoric walls made from what seemed to be large uniform stone blocks buried under many feet of earth. Despite these stones being glued together with a mortar containing quartz and iron, among other phenomena, mainstream geologists, archaeologists, and historians insist that Rockwall is a so-called natural formation. This assertion has been fiercely debated by some academics and a large community of independent truthers, who insist the reality of this prehistoric masonry is being covered up or swept under the rug. The story goes that in 1852, Benjamin Boydston, Terry Wade, and William Clay Stevenson discovered the strange Rockwall formation during the excavation process of building a water well on Mr. Wade's property. In February of 1925, archaeologist Count Byron de Prorock examined exposed sections of the walls and proposed that they were, indeed, constructed by a prehistoric race. Stuart McGregor's article describing this idea was published in the Dallas Morning News on February 22, 1925. The Austin American Statesman reported the following on the 12th of March, 1925. Quote, "Excavations which may disclose the origin of the Mystery Wall at Rockwall shortly will be begun under the direction of 2 University of Texas faculty members. Whether some race of prehistoric men or the forces of nature are responsible for the peculiar formation for which Rockwall County was named, they will have to determine. Dr. James E. Pierce, Professor of Anthropology, and Dr. I. T. Patton, Associate Geologist in the Bureau of Economic Geology, will be in charge of the digging operations. Their work, according to President W.M. Splon, will be done under a contract with Colonel Frank F. Holland, a Dallas publisher who is financing the scheme. Dr. Pierce has made a life study of the phenomenon, Splon said. He has long waited to undertake an exhaustive scientific study of the wall. Speculation as to the nature of the Rockwall strata has long been rife among geologists and experts in allied fields. Anthropologists became interested, moved by the consideration that the wall, if man-made, possibly was built by some early Texas race. North Texas first took notice of the formation when one Count Prokhov, or Prorov, a wealthy Russian anthropologist, known for having unearthed the site of ancient Carthage in North Africa, declared he thought the wall was of human origin. Folks in the little town of Rockwall, 30 miles northeast of Dallas, began to talk. The village and the surrounding country became excited at the prospect of startling revelations, and Dallas citizens raised a fund to help pay for the excavations. The Rockwall, according to Dr. Pierce, extends for more than 4 miles under the town of Rockwell, seat of the county of the same name. Cropping out at the surface at irregular intervals, the wall seems formed of stones of a quadrangular, regular shape, arranged in tiers with a substance resembling cement between the layers. Pierce refused to guess whether the wall should be attributed to man or nature. He admitted, however, that the former theory might point to the existence of a higher state of civilization among the primitive peoples inhabiting the Southwest than most anthropologists have supposed. A culture related to that attained by the Pueblos in New Mexico or the Aztecs in Mexico might be unearthed, he hazarded, when the army of diggers gets to burrowing. End quote.
Well, it's a fascinating subject. It's buried under the town of Rockwall that takes its name from this structure. When the settlers first moved to the area and began to try and dig water wells to get groundwater, they kept hitting some sort of rock, and now there's no natural occurring rock in that area, so they were perplexed. And once the excavations began and they began to see what they were dealing with, they began to find these masonry walls that actually were stones with buttered stones that were exactly how masons would build walls. And everyone in the town was arguing over whether or not they were going to be able to name the town after themselves. And a local Freemason who had just moved to town from Tennessee came and looked at the walls and noticed the work, noticed that it had buttressing and all of these techniques that a stonemason would use. And he told them immediately, well, none of you get to name the town after yourselves. We have to call this town Rockwall because someone was here long, long before modern humans were. So the main thing of it is that people always ask me, how can I see it? Well, you can't, unfortunately. It's buried under the town of Rockwall, Texas. But that's really my main goal with all this, to eventually have my own dig and be able to document all the things that people have seen in other digs that they have had. But the main thing about it is that it has all of these structural engineering materials built into it that are specifically designed for structural engineering, and that's how we know it's beyond shadow of a doubt not a natural formation, because you have something like the element called niobium, and niobium is used in reinforcing pipelines, jet engines, rocket engines, and the only way you can get niobium is by extracting it from an element called columbite. Well, that process was unknown to humans until the late 1800s. So how there's niobium in these stones and absolutely no columbite is a mystery. The other thing about it is you have these elements like titanite, brookite, starlite. You have tourmaline, which is resistant to high and low frequencies that will be applied to it, and I'll tell you why that's important in just a second. But all of these materials that are made, normally when you would take these materials and mix them together, their molecular structures would just bond together. But somehow, in a process unknown to man, the individual component materials in the rock wall stones remain independent in situ in the stones. This is a process we can't even replicate with modern technology. We have no idea how this is done. And when a dig was conducted there in 1999, it was found that when a excavator was accidentally placed on top of the wall, that the low-frequency vibrations from the engine of the excavator caused the wall to shake and vibrate and produce electrical energy. So one of the functions of this wall seemed to be not only a structure and a seawall as well, because shark's teeth were found embedded in the wall. It also served as some sort of energy generator. It's 20 miles in diameter. It's about 80 feet down to the bedrock. It sits on limestone bedrock. And the amount of sheer weird happenings that I experienced around this area as a young person growing up, I experienced a missing time event around the area. I experienced all kinds of strange sightings, UFO sightings around the area. So when I read Jim Marr's Rule by Secrecy book and heard this mention of this rock wall, immediately, this was in 2004, and immediately the light bulbs went off and I went, that's it. I just knew instinctively, that's it. That's what I've been looking for. That's why there's been all these crazy happenings, and I've experienced such weird things around this area, because there's something there, and it's in the, something in the neighborhood of, I don't know, something like 400,000 years old, judged by the dating. So it's just an amazing, anomalous thing, and the cover-up of it has been ongoing and continues to this day, Richard. Well, at the time in which it was constructed, we know that the inland sea, came all the way up to the location that is now Rockwall, here just outside of North Texas, right outside of Dallas, where I am. And so initially, I think it was meant to both serve as a seawall. I think it was all those things. I think it was a structure. And again, as I said, this ability for it to basically produce infinite free energy is amazing. And it uses sound to do it. And that's why you would want an element like tourmaline inside of the stone. Someone put that material. None of these materials are found anywhere near here in this area of North Texas at all. So you would want tourmaline in there, because tourmaline can resist high-frequency sound waves without shattering. It's one of the only crystals that can do that. So whoever built this thing absolutely had a knowledge of engineering. The stones get bigger the deeper that it goes down. It's built with a buttressing effect that it's intended to. It can hold live loads. So one of my estimations, too, and I know this, as wild as it sounds, one of my theories about the rock wall has been that it could have been some sort of an ancient extraterrestrial launching pad, because it's built to withstand hundreds of thousands of tons of pressure on top of it. It's built and to produce energy. So it may have been something where they were actually launching crafts or ships off of this thing hundreds of thousands of years ago. It's so fascinating, Richard. It's all below ground. The only thing that you can really see are stones that have been excavated and put on display. The rest of it is all underground, and the hard part of trying to do a dig out there is trying to find a piece of property or someone that has a piece of property where we can actually conduct and do a dig at. And with property values continuing to rise and everything being built up out there, eventually, in the not-too-distant future, it's going to be impossible to conduct a dig there. So I'm hoping that in the future we'll be able to actually get some LiDAR scans going and see if we can get an underground picture, much like what they've done in the Amazon jungle, finding ancient structures. I'm hoping that at some point we can have some LiDAR data and actually get to see a 3D underground topographical image of this thing. Absolutely. Well, he had actually gone and visited the ancient structures at Carthage, and according to him, what he saw in Carthage matched the same building style and structures of what he saw in the rock wall. And that led him to believe that whoever these people were in the ancient past that had built the structures at Carthage had also built the ones at the rock wall. Absolutely, and that's the thing about Rock. He was actually one of the first people to lead the excavations at Carthage, so he definitely had a knowledge of this. But that's when I started to think about the fact that it's possible that whoever these people were that were getting instructions to build these structures, they were getting them from a much older source, and possibly from a source that had been here for a long time. That I don't know. I know that a lot of people, there's a lot of old-timers, and there's a lot of people that have go back to the old days of Rockwall who still kind of are in charge and run things there, and they really don't like people talking about it. They really don't like people doing excavations and stuff like that. They really just want to keep the thing kind of covered up and not talked about. But I've talked to people who live there, and they tell me all kinds of strange stories of things they've experienced, things they've seen too. And again, once you add all those events up, it just can't be a coincidence when you have so many people experiencing such high strangeness and weirdness.
The following comes to us from the Austin American Statesman of Sunday, March 22nd, 1925. Quote, UT experts to excavate. Origin of ancient structure, hidden in mists of ages. This is the first of a series of articles which will follow the work of the University of Texas scientists who are about to begin excavating an old stone quadrangle at Rockwall, Texas, in the hopes of unearthing a prehistoric civilization. Indications that a civilization antedating our own lived in this country thousands of years ago have been found all over North America. Archaeologists and anthropologists now believe they have reached the key position for unearthing these ancient splendors in the United States. Follow the progress of these official excavators, whose authoritative reports will be published from time to time in the American Statesman. The great stone wall which runs under the little town of Rockwall, Texas, is about to lose its age-old secret to science. Since its discovery in 1852, this subterranean barrier, built in perfect bricklayer fashion, has been a mystery. Cursory examination by archaeologists has raised a question of whether the wall was made by man or nature. If erected by man, presence of the wall under the black lands of Texas means that at one time this part of the country was inhabited by civilization, possibly older than ancient Rome. If it is a freak of nature, it means the stone fence was made during the course of one of the Earth's violent upheavals. In any case, the formation antedates American civilization. For over half a century, this enigma of Texas has ruined the plowshares and dispositions of Rockwall farmers. Now it is to be excavated to determine by science whether the wall means a prehistoric civilization in the United States or a natural geological dike. The University of Texas is sending two of its best known experts. The University of Texas is sending two of its best-known experts in archaeology and anthropology, Dr. Leroy Patton and J.E. Pierce, to head an expedition to unearth the wall. Colonel Frank P. Holland, publisher of Farm and Ranch and Holland's Magazine, has agreed to bear all expenses of the party during the excavation. A short time ago, representatives of the Rockwall Chamber of Commerce secured the last signature of Rockwall landowners on contracts, giving the university scientists full rights to uncover the formation in any part of the town during the digging. A part of the wall is reported to run directly under the little stone courthouse which stands in a cement square in the center of town. The wall is built up in perfect tiers with varicolored rocks. The top layer is about 18 inches across, with stones the size of artificial cement blocks. At 40 feet below the earth, the rocks are said to weigh about 1 ton each. Between the rocks, which are of a sandstone body, is a substance of the appearance of a disintegrated mortar. If we pause here, I would like to remind you that the mortar which he is referring to clearly contains bits of quartz crystal and iron. We resume. Outcroppings of the stone barrier over an area of 4 miles indicate that the wall forms a complete quadrangle. On what would be the outside of the wall, the stones are smooth. On the inside, they are rough. Surveyors have traced the rock line and have prepared maps for the guidance of the scientists who will direct the explorations. Count Byron Kuhn de Prorock, who was one of the principals in the excavations of Carthage, visited Rockwall recently and expressed the belief that the old wall here held some connection with a prehistoric civilization. My brief examination of this formation indicates the wall is built very similar to the walls we unearthed in Carthage, he declared, before a scientific body in Dallas. The Count said that he planned to return here in 1926 and conduct an expedition to excavate the wall. It is not known whether he plans to offer his assistance to the University of Texas scientists who have taken over the work. And still another angle. One farmer showed investigators records proving he had at one time shipped some of the rock found near the wall to be assayed. The report said the rock assayed at $17.10 a ton for gold. Little attention has been given to these reports, however. Dr. Patton declared, "Science cannot understand why Europe and Northern Africa should have all the cream of the archaeological splendors. The Chinese have been traced back thousands of years. It is known that they wandered in many parts of the earth. It is quite possible, according to scientists, that a branch of the race drifted through this country and settled in what is now Texas." End quote. In 1927, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary, both L.W. Stevenson and J.W. Fuchs of the infamous Smithsonian Institute pronounced the structure as a natural formation. In 1933, a map was prepared by Martin Kelsey and Harold Denton with the aid of J.S. Mason, Rockwall County surveyor, of all the discovered outcroppings of the wall. At the time, there were 11 known outcroppings. In 1936, coinciding with the Texas Centennial, a section of the wall was excavated and opened for viewers for a small admittance fee. The attraction was owned by R.F. Canup. In the first few months, the attraction averaged 70 visitors per day. In 1949, a layman, Mr. Sanders of Fort Worth, conducted an excavation on property near what is now FM 549 and Cornelius Road. The rocks in this excavation averaged 12 to 14 inches thick. In 1950, Dr. James L. Glenn published his photographic essay on the system of rock walls at Rockwall, Texas. Among his observations, Glenn states, "The fact that there is a natural fault here does not preclude the construction of other walls by a prehistoric race within the same region." The following comes to us from Bob Lewis with Planet Rockwell in regards to a strange artifact found at Rockwall. Quote, "In a recent presentation by the Rockwall Historical Society, Sherry Stodghill Fowler presented a stone figure to the audience. The interesting object was found in one of the excavations along the rock wall. Various studies of this rock figure determined that it was A. the fossilized snout of a prehistoric winged dinosaur, B. a carved serpent's head made by an artisan from a pre-Columbian civilization, probably the one that built the wall, or C. a rock. The mystery lives on." In 1996, architect John Lindsay conducts a study of the rock wall. After examining excavations, he concludes, quote, After compiling past records, data, and documents, including recent studies and research, evidence of a prehistoric structure built by man is mounting." End quote. There are many who have theorized, with great evidence at their disposal, that the Rockwall of Texas was the handiwork of a race of giants which once inhabited the Americas. On July 11th of 1919, the Coconino Sun reported the following, in regards to a remarkable discovery not far from Rockwall. Quote, "A giant skeleton, 18 feet tall." If the report that the fossilized skeleton of a giant 18 feet tall has been found near Seymour, Texas is true, it is the most important ethnological discovery ever made in the world, remarked Dr. J.E. Pierce, professor of anthropology of the University of Texas. It would break all previous records of giants by nearly 10 feet, as the tallest man known to anthropological research was only 8 feet 5 inches in height. The skeleton is in possession of W.J. McKinney at Houston, Texas, an oil prospector, who found it and has been seen by a number of people who vouch for the truth of the size of the relic of a heretofore unknown race. Mr. McKinney, while making an excavation on the narrow watershed between the Brazos and Wichita rivers, came upon the fossilized skeleton near the surface. Mr. McKinney writes, "I estimate that this man weighed from 2,000 to 2,500 pounds. According to my deductions, he lived about 2,800 years ago. The skull is 6 times the size of that of an ordinary man." Mr. McKinney does not explain how he arrived at the figures as to the probable period of the existence of this remarkable man. It is probable that the bones of the giant will be donated to the Smithsonian Institution, which, under the direction of Dr. J. Walter Fuchs, is now conducting anthropological research work in Texas. End quote. The following was printed in the Rockwall Success, Rockwall's first newspaper, on May 28, 1886. Quote, "The greatest wonders that we have to record this week is the finding of a petrified human skull. While at work last Saturday, Ben Burton unearthed with his plow a gigantic skull, fully as large as a half bushel. The staring sockets wherein the eyeballs once rolled were as large as a half-gallon cup. Some few of the jaw teeth still remained, one of them about an inch thick by 2 inches long. This goes to prove that this country was once inhabited by a race of people that would be wonderful to look at now. Dr. Wiggins thinks it the skull of some antediluvian giant that would have weighed at least 1,000 pounds. Anyone wishing to see this mammoth skull can do so by calling at the Success office, as Mr. Burton says he will leave it there for inspection." End quote. On June 4, 1886, the Rockwall Success reported that after J.B. Burton had discovered the gigantic petrified skull, a large crowd began digging around in hopes of finding something interesting. A certain W.R. Greer is said to have accidentally breached a previously buried chamber along a portion of the Great Rockwall. The cavity proved to be a chamber about 60 by 100 feet square, and 40 feet from the floor to the slate roof, through which they had effected an entrance. This roof was supported on pillars of black marble, whose polished sides glittered in the lamplight and made one think of the Orient. This underground palace will undoubtedly astonish the world when thoroughly explored. In one corner stands a large iron chest, supposed to be full of gold or valuables, which was so heavy as to baffle all efforts to remove it. An expedition team is said to have discovered a bed of 25 feet in length, a pair of sandals 3 feet long by 10 inches wide, and a battle axe with a pole handle 12 feet long, which weighed at least 75 pounds, all matching the titanic stature of the skeletal remains found from these areas. Thomas Chandler Halliburton, a local judge, believed that the rock wall was built by a prehistoric Goliath to enclose his vast estate. Dr. Wiggins, Greer, Stager, and Handley are said to have discovered a huge iron kettle estimated to hold over 1,000 gallons, and against it leaned a fork as large as a hay fork. Inside the giant cauldron, they found ample evidence of brutalized human corpses, leading them to conclude that the giant Goliath was indeed a cannibal. Similar wall formations have been discovered elsewhere in America, but most notably in the American South, tracing the Gulf Coast, as can be seen in an article published by the Black Hills Union on the 26th of April, 1901. Quote, "Great buried wall causes a big stir. Evidence of a high civilization among prehistoric Mississippians is found. May be the cradle of mankind. Excavations that may upset all previous theories as to the race's early home is now used as a quarry, a startling discovery." End quote. Some have theorized that a network of great megalithic walls once traced the entire North American continent, much like the Great Wall of China.
There was a report that I'd received from some people who had a cave on their property not far from the rock wall, and they told me that if you try to take cameras or cell phones or anything, or any kind of batteries near this thing, they immediately drain, and it basically zaps any electronics that go near it. So again, there's no way to tell whether this has something directly to do with the rock wall, but I tend to think that it being in such close proximity to it, that there absolutely has to be something to that. But again, there's always been a lot of weirdness and high strangeness around this area, and it also lies directly on the 33rd degree parallel, which is also where Roswell sits on top of as well. So there's all kinds of weirdness and strangeness surrounding this thing, and the fact that it's aligned to the equinoxes and the solstices, just as a lot of the other ancient sites like the Serpent Mound in Ohio are, we start to see that there's something very, very technologically advanced about this thing. And again, high weirdness abounds at all levels.
Heading back south towards Florida, the last stop on our journey was the ancient Caddo Mounds. Caddo Mounds State Historic Site is an archaeological site in Weeping Mary, Texas. This Caddoan Mississippian culture site is comprised of a village and ceremonial center that features 2 earthwork platform mounds and 1 burial mound. Located on a pre-contact Native American trail, later named by the Spanish as El Camino Real de los Tejas, which ran from the east coast in Florida to the west coast in California, the settlement developed hundreds of years before the arrival of Europeans to the region. Archaeologists believe the site was created in approximately 800 AD, with most major construction taking place between 1100 and 1300 AD. The site likely began with the founding of a permanent village by the Hasinai, who moved into the region from the Red River area to the northeast in roughly 850 to 900 AD. The region had ideal qualities for a village: good soil, abundant food resources, and a permanent water source that flowed into the Neches River. What eventually became the largest mound, Mound A, was begun at this time. It is at the southern edge of the site and was surrounded by about 40 houses. In 1100, a new mound was begun near the center of the site, Mound B, and would eventually measure roughly 175 feet north-south and 115 feet east-west, and would eventually measure roughly 175 feet north-south and 115 feet east-west. Mound C, the northernmost mound of the three, was used as a burial mound, not for elite residences or temples like the other two. The site was the southwesternmost ceremonial mound center of all the great mound-building cultures of North America. The settlement was abandoned when the local Caddo ritually capped the mounds around 1250 AD and focused their activities from the east to west, according to their oral history. The outlying hamlets became more self-sufficient and grew less dependent on the site for religious and political matters. The Caddo culture that remained was similar to the earlier culture in many ways, but was more egalitarian and did not import as many exotic goods. In regards to religion, we were told by a worker that the mounds were indeed constructed according to astrological alignment, as are the majority of ancient ceremonial sites around the world.
New structures on top. We think they were adding new soil to both of these mounds about every 8 years or so. Not necessarily, don't know exactly what was causing that. Halley's Comet makes it's an 87-year cycle.
Wow.
So something in the heavens might have triggered them to say it's time to add new soil, tear down the houses, put new soil on, and then build new houses. This low ceremonial mound has had, at least in the small section they excavated, had no burials and no evidence of buildings on top of it. And so burials, no buildings, buildings, no burials, no buildings, no burials. So whatever they were doing on that low ceremonial mound was just from the top. If you had a map, an aerial map, the two larger mounds line up on true north. The true north marker would be Kerrville. So they might have lined up on the North Star to get that alignment. That mound is not in that alignment. It's actually outside of that line. So it makes a plaza in the middle. And so they may have been, Chief could have been up there saying, let the games begin, and they start playing stickball or chunky or something. Could have had dances on this side of the mound. That mound for sure, and the temple mound would have been flat in their heyday. They look more like a mountain now with kind of a crest, but they would have been flat-topped mounds when they were in use.
Right.
I think the burial mound also was flat-topped, but I'm not an archaeologist, and most archaeologists today believe it was always a cone-shaped mound. But if you look at the archaeological book or a reference when they dug into that mound, you see the sides, they use different dirt each time they added a layer, and the sides of the mound go like this, and then the layer of dirt that's flat, and then the next layer goes up, and then it's flat.
Right.
So to me that implies it was flat-topped mound until it started to erode a little bit over the years. Have I ever seen a ghost or anything? No, never have. I've never felt uncomfortable here, and I've been out here at night doing things. So I've never seen lights. I've never seen glowing globes.
Is that what a lot of people ask about? Or
they do, and not a lot, but there are some like ghost hunters, around. They'll come out and ask if we've seen things like that, but I have never seen that. Now, I've never been very sensitive to those things. My wife is, and the only place she ever feels uncomfortable is the barrow pit. It's on the other side of that low ceremonial mound is where the hole in the ground, and it's where they dug some of the dirt to make that mound. And when I first got here 10, 11 years ago, the first time she went over there, she said, I don't want to go any further. I don't like this place. Something happened here. And so I said, okay, I knew enough in the past. We've been married 40 years. So I said, okay, we won't go any further. And then come to find out a couple of months later, when they were excavating these mounds, this side of the property in 19 summers of 68, 69, and 70, they did excavate some of that barrow pit, and they found one burial in it face down with no grave goods around it, which usually was a sign that they were not buried in the normal manner.
Right.
So they had probably done something they shouldn't have, and might have been killed because of it, and was buried in what could have been the rubbish tip face down. So that panned out for my wife. We understood why she didn't like that place. There's another place on the back side of if you got to go over to the El Camino area, we have about 2 miles of walking trails over there. And the first trail we put in does have an old barn, and she doesn't like that area either for some reason.
Okay.
She'll go over there, but I know she just not comfortable. So nothing about me as far as not feeling, okay about the place, but she definitely has picked up a couple. So, you enjoy your side. There, like I said, there's narrative panels like this one all around this trail, and it's about 0.6 of a mile, just a little over half a mile long. See y'all. Thank you.
The DeSoto expedition of 1539 briefly passed through Caddo territory. Certain tribes within the Caddo area were said to have been particularly monstrous in appearance, as they deformed their faces and had extremely elongated skulls. The Tula people, for example, were said to have had heads a full yard in length. Let us now read from La Florida del Inca by Garcilaso de la Vega, a chronicle of the DeSoto expedition first published in 1605. The use of the word Inca comes from the fact that DeSoto had previously triumphed over the Inca in his South American conquests, and thus Inca soldiers had been enlisted into his ranks for his subsequent expedition of La Florida. So too was the author of that account, an Inca chronicler, making it a more impartial source than a Spanish account. The following comes to us in regard to the Tula people of the Caddo area. Quote, moreover, the neighbors of the Tula said that the deforming of their heads, some of which were more than a yard in length, and the painting of their faces and their lips, both inside and out, were done to make themselves uglier than they naturally were, so that the hideousness of their countenances might match the evil of their souls and the fierceness of their character. For in every respect they were most inhuman. End quote. It is worth noting that the Spanish yard is only 32 inches rather than 36, but this would still be a skull longer than any yet found among the Paracas culture of Peru or elsewhere. Elongated skulls abound in the remains of Caddo or Tula people, but none quite as long as reported here have been found. Not yet, at least. Or they have been covered up. The Caddo were an important group of closely cognate and usually allied tribes, formerly holding a considerable territory in West Louisiana and eastern Texas. In the earlier period, they were commonly known to the Spanish as Tejas, hence we get the name of the state, and to the French as Cenis or Asenais. The Caddo were a semi-sedentary and agricultural people, living in large, conical, communal, grass-thatched houses, and cultivating abundant crops of corn, beans, and pumpkins. Their men were brave, but not aggressive, while their women were expert potters and mat weavers. In general culture, they were on a plane with the Choctaw, Creeks, and other tribes of the Gulf states, and far superior to the moving tribes of the plains, or the fish-eaters of the Texas coast. They had a fully developed clan system with 10 clans, in which descent followed the female line. All but one of these, the Sun clan, were named from animals, and no Caddo would dare to kill the animal from which his clan derived its name. The eagle was also held sacred, and might be killed for its feathers, only by the regularly appointed priest, and after certain propitiatory ceremonies. Their religion savored of the bloody rites of the Natchez and Aztecs, including cannibalism. A French officer by the name of La Harpe describes one of these savage ceremonies, which he witnessed while sojourning in their villages in 1712. A large war party had arrived from an expedition against a western tribe, bringing with them 2 prisoners, all that remained of 6 unfortunates, the others having been eaten on the way. The prisoners were closely guarded in the open air, as according to tribal custom, a captive who had once entered a Caddo house was thenceforth free and safe from harm. 2 frames were quickly prepared by planting 2 pairs of stout uprights in the earth, about 4 feet apart, with cross pieces about 1 foot and 9 feet from the ground. To these frames the doomed men were then fastened, with their outstretched arms bound to the cross pieces above their heads, and with their whole weight hanging upon the cords. After hanging thus for about a half an hour, facing the rising sun, they were taken down and compelled to dance for their persecutors. At evening, having been all day without food, they were again tied up in the same way, facing the setting sun. The next morning, they were again suspended from the frames, this time with their faces looking for the last time upon the rising sun, with the whole tribe gathered around for the final tragedy. Fires were lighted by each family, and large earthen pots filled with water were placed over the blaze. 2 old men, each bearing in one hand a knife and in the other an earthen bowl, then advanced upon the helpless victims and stabbed them repeatedly, until the blood gushed out in streams and was caught in the bowls held below. This was then poured into a pot and cooked until clotted, when it was eaten by the priests. The bodies were then dismembered and a portion given to each family, by whom it was at once cooked and eaten. The cannibal orgy concluded with a dance. Such was the savagery which the missionaries challenged. Cabeza de Vaca may have met some of the Caddo in his aimless wanderings in Texas before 1536. After seeing the Caddo Mounds, we made our way back to Florida and made some great stops along the way, so make sure to stay tuned for more content. And in conclusion, with this documentary, let the bond between Florida and Texas, America's 2 great remaining bastions of liberty, be forever strengthened. Thank you for watching, and long live the Lone Star Republics, to which God has allocated the one and only true Fertile Crescent.
There's a detour sign on a road that winds out on the broad highway, but the place for me is a sign I see, T-U-L-S-A, straight ahead. There's a railroad crossing and the bus a rocking, just taking me away, but I'll pass the time till I see that sign, T-U-L-S-A, straight ahead. I'm gonna settle down that city fair. I'm home